r/ask Reddit. What hobby would you like to give a try but don't because of the expense? Flying without a doubt. Would want to get a pilot's license. You should at least take a discovery flight. They are usually only $100 or so. It's a lot like a drug dealer giving you your first taste for free. I did it once. 2,000 hours of flying later I finally gave up the habit. I treated myself to a discovery flight for my birthday around 5 years ago. I really enjoyed it, but I was never able to budget for a PPL. Later I learned that I'll never qualify anyway because of a medical condition, so oh well. Now I just fly on commercial planes using miles for my birthday every year. My job usually has me flying 30 to 50,000 miles a year, so I always have enough for a free flight. Do you mind sharing the condition? Curious because I was ineligible for the Air Force due to ear issues, but I haven't heard of a private license having the same restrictions. Sailing looks fun. R1 I can help on. Don't buy a boat. Look into sailing centers in your area. You can get lessons, rent the boats, and even get into racing. In my area, Boston, there's many of these places. You can go as small as a one-person boat on the river or as large as a 6-7 person boat out of the harbor and into the ocean. Relative to owning a boat, memberships are extremely affordable. Best part is that if you decide you don't love it, you're not 50k or more in the hole. Sites like Latitude 38 match up volunteer crew with skippers, boat owners. Sailing a larger boat is a lot easier with an extra set of hands. It's totally free, and a lot of skippers are okay with taking novices. Just keep your eyes open and follow instructions. That reads like a dating site for old rich men. Unemployment. LOL, this is my favorite answer. I knew two unemployed guys. One was just ridiculously rich, and despite having a company, he didn't actually work. His money and staff worked for him. The other guy was living at home with mommy and daddy, even now at 32, and just lives off their money and whatever benefits he is entitled to. Both their lives are so easy. I guarantee the guy living with his parents doesn't like his situation as much as the first guy, or even as much as it seems. That, or his parents don't. Source: was that guy. I'd like to do a lot more craft work, like woodworking. I do metallurgy already, and the tools are expensive enough. Adding woodworking or leatherworking would just be too much. Maybe check in your area to see if there is a makerspace around. Holy cow, I didn't even know makerspaces were a thing. I've always wanted to try woodworking and crafting but live in an apartment. This is a game changer. Thank you. Woodworking required space more than money. Yes, there are tools that cost $20,000, but there are options for $100. And as the saying goes, a bad craftsman blames his tools. Leatherworking is pretty cheap. I find the natural is the killer. Traveling. Farming. Not on a massive commercial level, just a couple acre field, but even that requires several $1,000s worth of equipment to properly manage. Warhammer 40k. I have a friend of mine who is single, in his 50s, no kids, and has a house with 2 rooms filled with 40k stuff. He also has a room dedicated to just painting. His figures, to my untrained eye, look amazing. He admits that 40k is a lifestyle. I accept it, but I don't completely understand it. RC attack helicopter models. I don't mean the little ones, but the 1.5-2 meters in length ones. You want warbirds? So much more fun. My brother and I fly RCA quarter scale warbirds and dogfight a lot. P-51 versus Spitfire is quite fun, but gets pretty expensive because you will at least a few times drive it into the ground. Glass blowing. I did this for a while. Classes were basically $25 HR, which was definitely not cheap, but it was doable. Of course, after you finish taking classes, it stays expensive. Know the best thing about taking glassblowing classes? Nobody knows what shitty glassblowing looks like. You'll bring your first paperweight or pumpkin home and everybody will be like, wow, it's amazing. Either people will be impressed with anything you make, or people will think your proudest piece is rather mundane. I took a couple semesters in university and my favorite thing I made is a simple cup. It's small and not all that special, but the amount of failed attempts that I had to get up to that glass with perfectly even walls and a nice even rim, with little flecks of color all throughout it, is way more special to me than any of the other things I made. Restoring a classic muscle car. I'd just love to learn mechanics, but I learn through doing and can't afford a second car to play with and can't afford to play around with my own car. Falconry. I asked a fellow on here a few years back what went into becoming a falconer, and he said it's a lengthy process that involves building an enormous enclosure for them to live in. I don't even own a house, let alone a yard big enough for that type of enclosure, so that ain't happening anytime soon. Not even the expense, but also the sheer amount of time involved. That's one of those everyday, often many hours a day things. The amount of time involved depends on the bird species you want to train. Red-tailed hawks don't take nearly as much time to train and get going as, say, an imprint goshawk. Falcons are also very time intensive and need lots of flying to get in shape. Harris hawks are very smart and require enrichment when they aren't being flown, or they are prone to plucking feathers. While it is extremely important to interact with your bird every day and to hunt as often as possible, there is a range in the kind of hours it takes depending on what bird you want to fly. Where I am, the upfront cost of equipment and enclosure building is about $2,000. Mountaineering. Not just your casual hike, but crossing glaciers, climbing with rope and reaching summits. Expect a big investment in gear. You'll want certificates, so you'll have to pay for several 2-week all-in trips, and many mountains can be summited seasonally, so you'll need to take 2 weeks off at random times of your job. Besides finding the time to train several days a week for a few months before departure, I guess I'll keep the $50K for something useful instead. Nah, send it. Ernest Hemingway said, "There are only 3 sports: bullfighting, motor racing, and mountaineering, and all the rest are merely games." Did Hemingway ever play a sport besides competitive drinking? How did bullfighting get in that list? Scuba diving. If I can't scuba, then what's all this been about? What am I working towards? Scuba diving actually isn't that expensive if you just rent the gear. Try taking an open water course and see if you like it. The only gear I bought is fins and a mask. I want to take up a new instrument. Mayonnaise is a good beginner instrument. Just make sure you got that down pat before moving on to something more advanced like horseradish. It's always nice to hone your craft. You can get a cheap instrument to learn on. I told my sister I always wanted to learn violin. I was in my early 30s at the time. Next thing I know, she's buying 2 violins on eBay because she's going to learn too, and my other sister is arranging us lessons from a high school teen who works part-time at her company, who happens to play violin and is looking to make extra money. She didn't charge us a lot, certainly not what we would have paid to a music teacher. Next thing you'll know, we're playing the violin. Not well, we were never going to play concerts, but we still learned and could play several tunes. It's never too late to learn something. Astrophotography, both time intensive and expensive. Do you enjoy the night sky? A pair of binoculars and a reclining lawn chair is a great start. You can practice finding messier objects, a good skill, or lie back and watch the sky after dark. Things are always happening. Early in an evening you can count satellites, then as they stop reflecting the sun you can watch for meteors. I started taking photos of the night sky with just a DSLR plus kit lens and a tripod, all used. My first telescope was also used, and in perfect condition, as most scopes rarely get used. I want to encourage you. Astrophotography is awesome and spending time looking up is rewarding. The only reason I couldn't get myself to jump into astrophotography is that I live in the city, and with the amount of light pollution we get is really bad, and I don't know if even an expensive telescope would help. Drag racing, or racing in general. I'm a huge gearhead, but there's no way I can afford even a basic crate motor, let alone the fabrication equipment to stuff it into something. Bracket racing. You dial in, make an educated guess how fast you'll be, and so does the other person. There's a delay on when you go, based on the difference in your dial in. So in theory, if you both hit your time, you'll cross the finish line at the same time. You could have a smart car win against a top fuel car. You're racing on your skill as a driver, not just on who has the fastest car. Sure, you need to pay entry fees, but that's much cheaper than building even a pro mod car. My local strip has street legal Fridays like this. $30 to race, and even if you lose first round, you can still make passes for fun all night long. I raced my 97 Ford Ranger for shits and giggles as a teen on a test and tune night, even staged a one-wheel burnout before every pass. My best time was a 19.71 stroke 4 mile, face rolling on the floor laughing. Restoring Victorian houses to their original condition, with all the architectural nuances authentic. I want to buy a Victorian house, restore it, and then turn it into a really great Halloween haunted house, with animatronics, actors, and everything. Move to Detroit. Some of those houses are already haunted by meth addicts, so you can check off most from your list. Having pets. Unfortunately, I don't have the time and money to do so. Thank you for recognizing this. Your time will come. I obviously don't know your life, living financial situation, but have you considered a smaller caged animal, like a hamster or rat? Their lifespans aren't too long, 2-3 years or so. They don't cost a ton to get started, and they're fairly low maintenance. Again, though, I appreciate that you recognize you might not be suited for pet ownership at the moment. If we had more people like you, the shelters wouldn't be overcrowded. +1 for ratties. They're short-lived, but they're amazing pets, as long as you can spend the time to clean out their cage frequently. The smell is fine as well. We taught ours to spin, walk like a dinosaur, and jump. Knife making, forging. Stained glass. Collecting rare books. Collecting art. Collecting old maps. I've been really considering collecting old maps, but putting it off until I have a space that can support actually displaying them. If you're in the US and interested in old but not super old maps, like 100-150 years old, I feel like I've definitely seen some being sold for fairly reasonable prices, especially stuff that might have value to you but not be super sought after broadly, like a map of your local town or something. Start my own private aerospace company like all the cool billionaires, but without all the pain of running a business and finding customers. Playing the harp. I wanted to learn so badly ever since there was a small segment on a kids TV show when I was little, maybe Teletubbies. I was upset for years that my parents said no until I looked into it myself much later and saw that harps easily cost £1,000 plus. I think it's fair they didn't want to hand that kind of money over to a 6-7-year-old who would probably have broken it or got bored after a few months. 22 now and still biding my time for financial security to finally give it a shot, probably with a rental rather than buying. I knew a woman once who played harp. She told me that it's not uncommon for multiple siblings to be able to play it. That's how families justify the expense of the instrument and also sometimes having to travel a long distance for lessons. In addition to the expense, the harp kind of takes over your life in other ways. She told me that when she was looking for her first car, they brought the harp along to make sure it would fit and come in and out without too much trouble. One upside is that she got lots of gigs playing atmospheric music at wedding receptions and fancy corporate parties. She said guests usually weren't paying attention, so she just got paid like $100 an hour to practice her scales. Cosplay. When I see the work and detail that goes into some of the people at cons I have been to, I admire the crap out of them, but I know I would have neither the time, patience or dedication it would take to create some of the things I have seen. My girlfriend and I made 18 different costumes in 2018. It can be extremely expensive, but depending on your character, your coupons, and your crafting ability, you can do a lot of great costumes on a budget. If you ever want to give it a try, get the Jones Fabric app for coupons, and hunt through Goodwill like your life depends on it. A cosplay doesn't have to be made from scratch. Some of my best were made by taking existing garments and just altering them. You're right that it does take a lot of time though. I suggest picking an easy character you can do well, and work on it here and there when you've got time. By the next con, you'll be good to go. Building a gigantic Lego city. I'd love to have a saltwater aquarium. The fish and coral are just beautiful. It's not so much the upfront cost that keeps me from doing it as the ongoing and optional ones. I was in a place that sold exclusively saltwater fish and fell in love with a little stingray. That stingray cost $2,000. Maybe someday, when I can trust my impulse control a bit more. Skydiving. Prospecting. I'd love so much to be able to buy a couple of claims on the side of a mountain and spend the next few years picking at it and pulling gemstones out. I've always wanted to play golf. Like a full 18 holes on a proper course, but with the fees and the membership needed and then also the full set of clubs etc. It is way too expensive. Therefore I tend to settle for the driving range every few weeks or so. There are lots of clubs that have reasonable rates for a one-day usage, and many resorts you can stay at that have golf clubs attached. You can rent a set of clubs and have at it. It helps to bring someone who knows what they are doing. But if you call in advance you might be able to get an instructor or at least guidance before you go. Long range target shooting. Shooting tin cans is fun, but I think it would be super satisfying to turn it into an art form and be able to hit a target 1,000 yards away. The guns are expensive. The scopes are just as much as the guns. The ammo is expensive. This isn't sustainable on an hourly income. Outdoor rock climbing. I climb indoors, but the gear and travel to do neat things outside is intimidating. Vinyl collecting or comic book collecting. Taking classes. There's so many classes I want to take through my local arts center and community colleges. Ideally I'd like to go back to school and get more bars, but I don't have the time or money. I just really miss school and I like learning. Painting. The canvases cost so much, and so does the paint, not necessarily. Painting an acrylic can be real cheap. Instead of canvas you can paint on wood panels, and you only need a few basic colors to get started. Also Craftsman brushes are decent, especially for how inexpensive they are. I've never painted in oils, but watercolor can also be cheap. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.